Hello viewers, you're welcome to another edition of HealthAfrik on AAU TV. AAU TV is the voice of higher education in Africa, and HealthAfrik is proudly brought to you by the Association of African Universities, which is the voice of higher education in Africa. Today we are talking language and mental health, which will be very interesting because we have a professor from the University of Ghana to help us delve into the issues today. As I said, we are discussing language and mental health, and Professor Nana Aba Appiah Amfo is here to help us discuss the issue today. She has 16 years of working experience in higher education environment. Can you imagine that? And she's also the Dean of the School of Languages. She is a prolific writer and she has a specialization in pragmatics. There's a many other, we'll be talking about a lot. So please stay tuned. We are going on a quick break. My name is Bridget Denteh. Please stay tuned. You're welcome back. As I said earlier, today we are discussing language and mental health. Prof, you are welcome.
Thank you very much, Bridget.
It's a pleasure having you here today.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Oh, okay. So you recently had a presentation at an inaugural lecture on Beyond Babel, communication in context. And I'd like you to tell us the inspiration behind that topic, Beyond Babel.
Well, the title of my inaugural lecture was Beyond Babel, Communicating in Context and Across Domains. Yes. What's the inspiration? Well, the inspiration for the first part of the title has to do with our multilingual context. You know that there are so many languages in Africa. There are, at the last count, 2,140 languages in 5 major language families on the continent. In Ghana alone, there are 81 living languages. 73 of these languages are indigenous languages, and we have other non-indigenous languages like English and Hausa. And so really, whatever we do communicate in a multilingual context. And you know the Bible story of the Tower of Babel. Yeah. And for many people, that is the origin of the multiplicity of languages. And so I came from that context, that within the multiplicity of languages, what happens? How do we manage the multiplicity of languages for our mutual benefits? So really, that was the inspiration. And then I went on to talk about language use in specific context. And we could have gone on and on, but I chose 2 contexts, which is language and gender, and language and health.
Okay. So that was the inspiration behind the topic Beyond Babel.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we talk about language, now we are talking language and mental health. When I hear language, the first thing that comes to mind is language structure, tenses, and all of that. How does language click? How does it connect with health? Not even mental health in person, but then health alone. Where's the connection?
Yeah, that's right. You are right. I mean, well, I'm a linguist, and linguistics has to do with the scientific study of language, and that is quite broad, you know. So there is core linguistics, and then there is applied linguistics in the broad sense of it. So when you're talking about core linguistics, yes, then you're talking about phonetics, you're talking about phonology, so you are dealing with sounds and how they combine in specific languages. You are talking about morphology, which has to do with word structure, how words are formed and the various rules of the different parts of the words. You're talking about syntax, which has to do with the sentence structure and so on. So that's what you are thinking about. But there's that area of applied linguistics to sociolinguistics. Pragmatics really has to do with language use in context. So language use in linguistic context, language use in social context, language use in religious context, whatever context that you can think about. So pragmatics really bridges the gap between theoretical linguistics and applied linguistics. And so we look at language use in different domains and in different contexts. And as you know, language is everywhere.
Yeah, language is everywhere. So why did you choose language and health and then language and gender? You just two.
Well, I mean, I had a limited time period in which to give a lecture, so I had to limit myself. In fact, initially I was thinking about 3 domains, so the third one was going to be politics, but I realized that was going to take too much time, so I had to limit myself to these domains. And these are areas within which I have worked, you know, within the past years, so I just had to choose.
Okay, but why language and mental health specifically?
Well, language and mental health, first of all, I think that language communication is critical to our healthcare delivery, right? Very often when we think about healthcare, we are thinking about the hard science of it, right? But it's very important for us to look at the social aspect. The communication aspect is very critical. And I think that mental health is a unique area, really. I mean, it's mental health patients are often stigmatized, right? And I also think that in dealing with mental health, communication has a critical role to play. Communication is critical for all aspects of healthcare, but even so with mental health, because I mean, for mental, even diagnosing mental health, you can say that go and do this laboratory test or the other laboratory test for us to know your situation. It all has to do with how the healthcare provider is able to communicate with the patient or the caregiver so that they are able to get the critical information they need for an appropriate diagnosis, which then provides the basis for the appropriate management.
Okay, so if the communication is between the doctor or the healthcare provider and then the patient, is it limited to just them? Is the communication limited to just them, or the society has a role to play in all of this?
Well, when it comes to mental health care communication, it's not limited to just the healthcare provider and the patient or the caregiver. Even within the hospital setting, there's a whole chain there. There's a whole range of healthcare professionals that the patient or the caregiver has to deal with. But outside of that, within the community, the person who is diagnosed with a mental illness would also have to be managed. You know, mental illness, most mental ill health conditions are chronic conditions. So they are conditions that the person would have to live with the most part of his or her life. And this person cannot be in hospital forever, right? They go into hospital when there are acute situations, and once that phase is over, the person goes back into the community. And the person would have to live in the community. And so people within the community would have to help with the management of that person in relation to the condition that the person has. So yes, people within the hospital, the healthcare providers have a role to play, but also people within the community too, they have critical roles to play in the management of mental ill health conditions.
Okay, so if aside mental health, have you exploited other health areas like pediatrics?
Yes, we are with my collaborators. We are currently doing a project which involve other chronic diseases like HIV, AIDS, hypertension, and diabetes.
Okay. So I read one of your journals, Insanity is from Home. I'd like you to kind of explain what went into that journal.
Okay, so that's a journal article which we titled Insanity is from Home, the expression of mental health challenges in Akan. That was the result of a project that I was the principal investigator for, which was sponsored by the Office of Research and Innovation Development at the University of Ghana. And it was work that I did together with my colleagues in the health sciences. So there was a psychiatrist, Dr. Adodoy, and then a public health practitioner, Dr. Fui. So for that larger project, we had 3 study sites. We were looking at the expression of mental ill health in Akan, both within the communities and also in the hospital settings, how the health practitioners manage the communication process with the patients and the caregivers. It's also within the context, when talking about the hospital setting, it's within the context that our health practitioners are trained in our official language, which is English, right? And then they go to practice in communities and they encounter patients and caregivers who are not always proficient in English, but they have to still deal with them. So that's one aspect that we were looking at. So we have 3 study sites, Kumasi, Koforidua, and Ankafo, Cape Coast. We wanted study sites where we would have either a psychiatric hospital or a psychiatric unit in a hospital. So we had Ankafo, then in Kumasi we had the psychiatric unit of the Komfanochi Teaching Hospital, and in Koforidua we had the psychiatric unit of the Eastern Regional Hospital.
Okay, so when I read it, you made mention of a few Akan proverbs like but down for what it's for the community or something like that.
Down for what or no mom and son.
Okay. So it means that the community has a role to play.
Absolutely.
In all of this.
Yeah.
And what was the outcome of this particular project? Because you said you mentioned other proverbs, or if not proverbs, they are phrases.
Yeah, you do.
That's got to do with insanity and all of that.
Yeah.
It's with outcomes.
Well, the one of the findings of this project is that it is clear that within our communities we have a certain conception, or if you like, sometimes even misconceptions about mental ill health, right? So members of these societies, and we were looking at the Akan speaking communities. So members of the Akan speaking communities, they have certain ideas with regard to mental ill conditions. For example, they recognize the chronicity of mental ill health, right? So if you take that, what is its implication? Well, the implication could be that people who have ever been diagnosed with mental ill health could be treated in a certain way within the communities, right? On the other hand, if we properly utilize this knowledge base, then it can be used as a basis for educating the community that, well, it's true mental ill health is a chronic disease, but it's a chronic disease such as hypertension or, or diabetes. And so it can be properly managed. And so the community with that understanding will then support everybody to support mental people who have mental ill health or mental conditions.
Okay, so you visited a whole lot of facilities. How does language dehumanize mental health? What exactly are people saying? How are they seeing it? How are they expressing it to dehumanize mental health?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say outright that language dehumanizes mentally ill patients, right? Okay. The language has a way, or people have a way, or communities have a way of talking about mental ill health. Now, what we need to do is to look at how people talk about these. Sometimes it is negative, but sometimes too it is not outrightly negative. It just tells us what these people know and believe about mental ill health conditions. And so for me, that should be the basis for health education. Okay. Right? Because when you are teaching people, you start with what they know before you talk about starting from the known to the unknown, right? So we use what they already know as a basis to educate them so that we will all be able to treat people who have been diagnosed with mental ill health conditions well, and even encourage people. Sometimes when people have mental ill health conditions, they don't even want to go to our health facilities, and they try all sorts of, remedies, and sometimes by the time they eventually get around into going to our health facilities, then it's a bit late, in the day. Okay. But when communities have the proper education, then we wouldn't, look at mental ill health in a certain light. I mean, when somebody has any other health condition, they don't hesitate to go to our health facilities. And so why should that be the case for mental ill health? It's because we have certain misconceptions or certain conceptions about that. And so we should use this as a basis for educating the communities so that we will all be able to handle mental ill health appropriately.
We're going on a quick break. We'll be back shortly. From that break. Today we have in our studios Professor Nana Aba Appiah Amfo from the University of Ghana to help us delve into the issues of language and mental health. Prof, before we were going on the break, I was asking some of the barriers to addressing stigma when it comes to mental health.
Well, barriers to addressing stigma. I'm not quite, sure what you have in mind, okay. Right? But obviously, mental ill health is one condition which is stigmatized, yes. And it's not just within our communities. It's something which is quite widespread. So it's a condition which is stigmatized. And so we need to find ways in which we will help to reduce or eventually eliminate the stigma, right? Because when the stigma remains, then, people who have these conditions don't get to receive the right care that they need. And by the way, mental ill health is a lot more widespread than we may think. In fact, very many of us, I'm sure even people right here in your studio, may have, various degrees of mental, conditions, right? And so it's not far away from us as we think. It's with us. Is with us. And so we need to find ways of embracing that as a legitimate health condition, and then support the people who show signs of mental ill health, right? When we do that, we come in quickly to help people as soon as they show signs of mental ill health. And then their conditions don't deteriorate so fast, and they do get the help that they need. Sometimes people don't want to come close to people who have mental conditions, right? It's all part of the stigma. But as I said, when we identify these early, and then we aid them to get the needed support, then they don't even deteriorate to the point where they become destructive to society. When people with mental ill health are on the appropriate management regime, they will be able, in very many cases, function perfectly, just like anybody else, and they're going to be productive to society.
Okay, so if this is the situation, then how then do you propose we communicate with the mental health patients for both the society, someone in the society, and then the doctor, the patient?
Well, I think that within the hospital setting, that's a different situation, and we don't have many psychiatrists. I understand that there are just 25 psychiatrists, in this country for a population of 27 million people. That's definitely wholly inadequate. They know their job, they know, how to communicate with these patients. There are also psychiatric nurses, but again, there aren't very many of them. But they know how to talk to the patients, even to let them come out and talk about what is not going right with them. So yes, I think that the hospital setting is different. We just have to find ways of, training more specialists, whether they are psychiatrists or they are psychiatric nurses. I think that the larger issue has to do with the community, because even when the mentally ill person goes to hospital, it's for a brief period. For most part of the person's life, the person is living in a home, the person is living in the community, the person is working in an office or selling in a market, or the person is really within the community. So I think that it is for us, to use various fora like this one, opportunities, within our churches, within our mosque, various students associations and so on, to talk about mental ill health, and how we need to be able to communicate properly with these people and not use words and phrases that further stigmatizes them. And when we do that, the people don't even want to be part of society. They want to seclude themselves and so on. So I think we just have to do further education and use different kinds of fora to do that.
Okay. Prof, I'd like to go back to one question I asked before the break, which has got to do with how language dehumanizes mental health. And you said language doesn't, not in every sense. But then I was thinking, has it got to do with culture or our behavior that dehumanizes mental health?
Well, I mean, the point is that language is linked to culture, right?
Okay.
What we express is the result of what we have experienced, what we believe, what we know, right? And so a language only becomes an expression of our beliefs and our cultures, right? And so that's why I'm saying that it is not language per se which dehumanizes, mental health or people with mental ill health, right? Whatever we express is as a result of what we know, believe, what we have experienced as part of, our culture and our life experiences, right? And so, yes, as I gave examples, earlier on, within our cultures, which is instantiated through our language, we have expressions which recognizes the chronicity of mental ill health. We have expressions which indicates that we stigmatize mental ill health. We have expressions which indicates that we recognize that the management of the mentally ill is a communal responsibility, right? So when you look at all of these, yes, they are the negative sides, but they are also the positive sides, which we can use as a basis for health education.
Okay, so language then again can be used to solve the issue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Communication, education, language.
Okay, so I was thinking cultural bound syndromes, because our culture, when it comes to the issue of marriage, they will tell you that when you're going to marry someone and then the person has, maybe you look into the background, then there are instances where one or two have mental illnesses, you don't marry into the family. What if there's a situation where there's been a lot of education, and even though there's been instances where someone's family has had a few mental illness, you can still marry into it, right? When people have got to know that it is not that bad the way they see it.
Well, as I said, we will have to systematically, educate people using different approaches. Right? So when I talk about education, I'm not just thinking about the formal sense of it. It can be done through various means, through our elders in the communities, as I said, through our churches, through our mosques, even through our festivals, right? We can find ways, of educating people so that gradually our mindsets about the mentally ill health, the mentally ill people will shift, right? We would know that these are conditions that we will be able to manage, so that we don't have, a whole family being stigmatized because there was one person who had a particular condition at a particular point in time. But you see, when we do the education properly too, then we would have fewer cases of the mentally ill health deteriorating. Now, when you travel, to developed countries abroad, how often do you see the mentally ill on the streets? Does it mean that in those communities there are people who do not suffer from mental ill health? There are people who suffer from mental ill health, but they are managed properly. And so we don't see them spilling, into the streets and, in conditions which are totally appalling.
Okay, so if we're going on a break, not really a break, but then this is the section where we tell people the right words, since we're talking about language, the right words to use to express mental illness. So viewers, please stay tuned and please take note of the words and phrases to use when you're trying to express yourself in a mental health situation. You're welcome back. I hope you learned a lot from that quick one. So, Prof, we'd like to wrap up here. What do you think is the way forward when it comes to stigma and then language use in mental health?
Well, the way forward is for there to be the awareness within our communities that mental illness is another disease, right? It's another disease, like I said, like diabetes, like hypertension. It's generally a chronic situation, but people can be successfully managed when the condition is identified in good time and the person goes to the appropriate health facility to get the needed management regime. We also within our communities need to be considerate to people who have these conditions. Just like you be considerate to your friend who is not well, who is ill. Yes, we need to be considerate to such people. We need to watch our utterances to them. We don't have to use words that would dehumanize them. For us in Akan, for example, anybody who has a mental illness is bodamfo, and we just dismiss them in that way. We don't have to be doing that. As I said earlier on, many of us, if not all of us, have varying degrees of mental illness. So when we look at it that way, then we would be more considerate towards people who are, physically demonstrating, that they are mentally ill.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof, for coming. Thank you very much for your final words. So as Prof was saying, we should watch our utterances towards people because language has the tendency to affect someone either positively or negatively, as she has been saying throughout the show. Thank you for staying tuned. This has been HealthAfrik on AAU TV. My name is Bridget Denteh. Have a lovely evening.